Welcome to today's Chief Data and Technology Officer Summit, the third in our six-part series running June through November. I'm Caitlin Helfrey, director of our IBM AI Accelerator and host of our Summit Series. Our last two sessions featured Chief Data Officers leading in turbulent times and AI ethics and trust. Building on those insights, today we bring you data, digital, and technology in partnership. We are fortunate to have four leading Chief Technology and Digital Officers joining us today, from diverse industries across customer and market research, technology, healthcare, and sports and media. To kick us off, we'll dive into the truly thin line between passionate sports fans and data nerds, statistics people like myself, as we explore timely insights into how the return of the NBA's 2020 season is enabled by data and technology at all levels to protect and empower staff, players, and fans. Throughout our session, we will explore how C-level executives are working across their peer groups to drive transformation, how these leadership styles have changed in light of both COVID-19 pandemic and social and civil turmoil. We also ask what role data plays in these critical decisions, and from a technology perspective, why is the move to hybrid cloud essential, and how do you build these proficiencies across your teams as we all look to drive operational efficiencies in these challenging financial environments. Also, next steps on embedding AI into workflows, building solutions, and value delivery. As always, these sessions feature prominent industry leaders that tackle big strategic ideas and recommend actionable steps to help you in your own work. Thank you for joining us. Please share your insights and perspectives throughout the session in the chat and live Q&A. With that, let me turn it over to CDO Club CEO Dave Matheson for a conversation to kick us off with our IBM Global Chief Data Officer and the Chief Technology Officer of the National Basketball Association. Dave, over to you for intros.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. We're thrilled to bring you episode 3 in the IBM CDO Summit Series, this one entitled Digital Data and Technology in Partnership. We're tipping this one off with our featured speakers, Inderpal Bhandari, the Global CDO at IBM, and Krishna Bhagavatula, the Chief Technology Officer at the National Basketball Association. I'm David Matheson. I'm the founder and CEO of the CDO Club and CDO Summit. Many thanks to IBM for supporting this important CDO Summit Series. And we want you all to play a meaningful role today, so be sure to send us your questions through chat so that we can have a live session with our panelists after the program. So in that cooperative spirit, let the games begin. The NBA has been at the forefront of using data and technology in innovative ways. Since 2017, Krishna has been CTO at the NBA, where he's responsible for setting the NBA's technology strategy and ensuring alignment with the league's objectives. The NBA boldly halted play on March 11th, and I recall NBA Commissioner Adam Silver wanting to protect the health of the players, staff, and fans. So I was wondering if you can provide some color commentary, if you will, on the shutdown and the restart. And given all this, how is the NBA leveraging data and technology today? Krishna.
So thank you for that introduction, David. Pleasure to be here. Hope all of you are staying safe and healthy. Maybe best to speak about my team and my mission statement that I've set up for my team. It's really one sentence. It's drive innovation through technology to empower our staff, delight our fans, and safeguard the brand. Just to unpack that a little bit, innovation through tech, it's the core foundational principle or DNA that I look for folks within my organization. It's not really just folks that are excited about technology just because it's the new sexy or cool thing to do, but really thinks about want to use technology to drive real business value and change. In tech terms, I call it being scrappy. In basketball terms, it's about having hustle. It's that intangible where you're always giving your fullest to come up with the best possible outcome. Empower colleagues, that's making sure that the staff across the NBA, across employees at the various teams, across our referees and officials and players have really frictionless experiences with technology across the board, be it computers or phones or internet portals or collaboration tools or emails or what have you. Delighting fans is the next one, and that's where data plays a significant part. It's about understanding our fans. It's understanding how they're consuming our content. It's about looking at what they did and anticipating what they want to do. And in order to do that, I work with teams in basketball operations, in digital product teams, marketing, partnerships, merchandising, broadcast, content, to make sure that we are able to make sense of all the data that we are bringing in and collecting, and that we are really leveraging that to create a wow moment for our fans. The third one is safeguarding the brand. Even as we are doing all of this, we want to make sure that, or even after, as we are using all these cutting edge tech, we are able to provide a secure space for those experiences, be it workflows, streamline or automate, amazing fan experiences. And across all of them, cybersecurity plays an important role. But it's not just limited to cybersecurity. It's also making sure that we have the right checks and balances to make sure that our HR and legal systems are audit proof and so on and so forth. So when the pandemic hit, like you said, March 11th, that date is etched in my memory. The first thing that struck me was, can you imagine how we would have handled this if this had happened like 20 years ago, when dial-up was standard, or 1 Mbps was a luxury. AOL Instant Messenger was the social media of choice, right? Even 10 years ago, I think cloud was in its infancy. So I think this time around, honestly, I think in some sense we caught a lucky break, because the cloud and the systems that we have deployed across the enterprise are mature. A lot of our initial focus was on staying connected, and our cloud utilities certainly helped. We wanted to keep our players and our teams updated. Data was important, and we wanted to do these updates in real time. We learned a lot from our international colleagues. The NBA, we are fortunate that we had offices in China and Hong Kong, which were kind of slightly ahead of the spectrum, so to speak, in terms of their experience with COVID compared to the US. So we learned a lot through those interactions with those international teams. Some people would say that the pandemic has disrupted roadmaps for technology and innovation. My glass half full viewpoint is that it has actually accelerated certain projects, and it has created or identified new priorities for us to pursue. We have an innovation hub. We got a ton of ideas through campaigns that we ran on the Innovation Hub. Two of the products that we have, the Virtual Fans product, we have the Tap to Cheer product, and we're looking closely at the data to measure engagements on those products that we have put out there. Last but not the least, it was during the pandemic that we actually announced our intent to develop a D2C platform. It is important for us to move forward and continue the cycle of innovation to reimagine how our fans are consuming the grain. Across the board, maybe this is a long-winded answer, but data plays a huge role. Feedback loops are important in all the product decisions that we are making. I often tell my teams that you miss 100% of the shots that you don't take. So I've learned that you need to take risks to be successful, and data helps you take those risks. Another thing I tell them is create with taste, validate with data. So that's what we are trying to do as we are putting products out there in front of our fans. Hopefully that makes sense.
How have you collaborated across the C-suite? For a basketball analogy, who's playing point guard, forward, and center on the tech team?
That's a great question. I think, from a data standpoint, just to start, the NBA is top 2 or 3 sports leagues on social media. We have 1.7 billion likes and followers. That's a billion with a B. Across our league, the players and the team and partner sites. We are comfortably the most followers amongst US sports leagues across social media. I've also realized that there's a thin line that separates our fans from data geeks, because there's a very thin line between a sports fanatic and a data geek, right? Because most sports fanatics are data geeks as well, because they love stats. So our stats system and maintaining the integrity of that platform, making sure that our fans have access to the right stats, has been very incredibly important through this process. Then as we got ready for restart, I'll start from kind of the basics, like the block and tackle, some of the things that people take for granted. And you alluded to this earlier. We talked a little bit about the bubble. We wanted to make sure that we built the right workflows and systems to ensure the right compliance process for applying and approving staff and players and support personnel heading into the bubble. So I spent a lot of time working with the office of our chief people officers, the office of the general counsel or the legal teams, the chief compliance officers, to develop automated workflows to facilitate that. Then with the league operations team, I worked to make sure that we'll have the right tech deployed in Orlando for all the in-game systems, the whistles, the clocks, the courtside stat systems. I've been working with the broadcast and media operations teams, the remote cameras that we're using for player interviews, for instance, making sure that we have the right tech deployed there so that the players can interact safely with press during press conferences. With the digital media product, marketing, and partnerships teams, we want to make sure that we've created the right infrastructure for the virtual fans experience, and that we are actually looking at the data in terms of how the virtual fans fans are actually interacting with that product. With the events team, we are making sure that we have the right gear. And when I talk about gear, we've essentially moved the NBA network out to Orlando. So it is switches, it is routers, it's firewalls. And we want to make sure that we have extended the NBA network into the bottom bubble. I've also been working with the head of facilities, security, and player health, because besides the workflow systems, we want to make sure that we have the right contact tracing or exposure notification systems deployed in Orlando. The other interesting thing that we're doing is wearable tech provide proximity notifications through either audible or haptic alerts when folks get within 6 feet of each other. So I'll attempt to answer it, at least certainly from terms of what my team does. So for the most part, I think it's a combination of my infrastructure, ops, program delivery, and app dev teams playing point guards, because they're the ones running offense on most projects. Game tech is probably shooting guard, because they're independent largely, they're thinking on their feet, and they want to make plays. The customer experience team is probably maybe a small forward, right? They've got to be versatile. They've got to be the ability to cater to different needs and personalities. Cybersecurity, I would say, is power forward. They've got to be reliable. They must deliver, and they must have the muscle to execute. And maybe I'm the center, right? Maybe I'm standing under the basket. I'm trying to reach for those rebounds and scrambling for those tip-ins. In other words, I'm doing whatever it takes to bring our projects home.
Great summary. And of course, that data is critical not only for fans, but for coaches to make real-time decisions. And as you brought up wearables, I know Interpol, you had pioneered, when you were with IBM Research back in the 90s, you had worked with the NBA to do some of this innovative work leveraging data and technology, especially for coaches. What did that entail?
Yes, Dave, that's absolutely right. I think I was fortunate that I came across the NBA when I was that time I was working on data mining. I wanted to show that it was going to be very useful for the layperson. And I settled on the NBA coach as the example of the layperson. But I think it's extremely relevant to today's discussion on digital transformation and so forth. I think because it was a microcosm of what needs to be done if you're trying to transform something. You know that I have this blueprint for digital transformation, which basically says data, technology, your business processes, and your organization and cultural considerations should all move forward at the same step. If anything is too far or is it one step ahead or one step behind, the whole thing breaks down. In the case of the NBA, they are so forward thinking. They always have been. And you see that even today, even 20 years ago, they were like that. So I was fortunate to have stumbled on them. What was interesting was initially we start with, let's pick up data, right? So data, I didn't have data, but I had access to the box scores that were reported in the newspapers. So I took that and I demonstrated that there was going to be value, and a couple of the coaches got very interested in that. And then what ended up happening was the league where Krishna works, they got wind of the situation and said, you can't be giving unfair advantages. This has got to go to everybody. One of their executive vice presidents, a good friend of mine now, Steve Helmuth, he began to work with me on this. So now we kind of enter into technology. And he said, why are you using the box scores? I said, well, that's all I got. And he said, you know what? We need to collect play-by-play. So that ended up then resulted in laptops being used at courtside with an interface that we designed jointly to capture data on a play-by-play. And that started setting up technology. And then, of course, we didn't have the cloud, but they hooked up a server in Florida, and this data would be uploaded there. And then you see the interplay of data and business process starting to occur because, in the NBA, they play many different kinds of lineups. They won't always go through the lineup as Krishna described it, but that's a good way to think about it. What they might do is they might play 4 guards sometimes just to get speed, to confuse the opponent. So we actually had a high school kid who was very much into basketball come up with a way of mapping those types of adjustments back to this conventional lineup as to who's really playing small forward here, even though it might be a guard. We kind of did that with an estimate of size and so forth. So you see the interplay of data and process there. Finally, they used to have a video coordinator at each of the teams. They began to then get people who could understand data as well, so they could actually make use of the data mining software. And they started getting these people who were data and video coordinators. The cultural aspect of this also in terms of the coaches actually being surprised by these patterns that play your two backup players, play your backup point guard and your backup forward is one that Steve and I talked about at several conferences jointly. Is a good example where the coach had to then, we linked them to the video clips that allowed them to do that. But what it did was the transformation, you can see how it went with data, technology, business processes, and the culture and organizational types of changes that need to occur. On the IBM side, we ended up, you can see the changes that we made to our own product suite based on that early experience. Now you have like Watson essentially not just processes data, but also multimedia. So it's actually able to pick up the kinds of things that we had to do manually. What I mean by that is you came up with a pattern which said, play these two backup players, then the coach would be taken to the video clips when those two players were on the floor so they could make the judgments. This player is very quick, the other player gives him room, he can blow right by him, etc., etc. But now we were able to do this stuff automatically in Watson. So you can kind of see the progression on both sides, how that occurred. So I still think it's extremely relevant. And of course, kudos to the NBA because they've always been very forward thinking.
COVID certainly has introduced all kinds of unexpected consequences. If you compare your leadership style back in November and December to today.
From my perspective, I think it's been an incredibly humbling, but also amazing learning experience. Now, more than ever before, staff need to see and hear from the leadership team on a frequent basis. And I have personally realized the full value of having recurring command center type meetings across my leadership team. I don't do decks anymore. I meet twice or thrice a week. Most of my meetings are run off of live dashboards, and we are making decisions then and there. I used to do a quarterly department all hands or town hall. Now I do that bi-weekly. It's a very fast-paced 30-minute meeting. The leadership team has been very scrappy in setting it up. We don't do choreographed decks like we had in the past, but we share projects in real time. And we've often featured staff live from the bubble in Orlando talking about what they're working on. We've quickly realized that this format might actually make sense in the long run, and maybe the quarterly town hall is going to become a relic from the past or of the past, right? The other thing is that the office water cooler is no longer there. The hallways are not being used. And I've realized that it's vital for us and on us as leaders to create those virtual hallways and water coolers that foster those connections and conversations that are very important to the DNA of engaged and high-performing teams. Crisis, I think, has also given all of us leaders, it has helped us understand the importance of having a bias to action. And as a leader myself, I've leaned into everything, problem or challenge that's thrown on my way, and I've tried to act on it immediately. I think planning is great, but acting is better. It's best if you're actually armed with data that can guide you to make a decision quickly. And I think that mindset has made us very innovative.
To wrap up, question for both of you. We'll start with Inderpal. Given your work and IBM's work with the NBA in the past, what's next?
It's more all around transformation eventually, right? It's about digital transformation. And I think with the cloud as kind of the basis for the technology, with regard to data, you've got very, very sophisticated technologies and approaches now that make that much easier. The harder nuts to crack have always been the business processes and the organization and the culture. And I think those two is where you need the most focus. And I think it's been quite evident that there's been an adoption of technology because of the pandemic and the crisis. But I think you're going to see that there's going to be an even bigger adoption of approaches to address business process change, change management, organization and culture, and those types of things, as people realize that that's even more significant.
Thank you so much, Inderpal. It's the same question to Krishna. Fast break. What's next for the NBA?
I agree with a lot of what Inderpal said, right? Strategically, I think it's very similar to the NBA. But I'll probably limit my response to just tech, at least in my role as CTO. And I'll probably break it down maybe a trifle more tactically. But firstly, doing whatever it takes from a technology and data standpoint to ensure a successful completion of the NBA restart and the WNBA season. I think that's super important. And we need to make sure, more importantly, that we are taking away learnings from our experiences this year to help plan for our tech needs for the next season. Because very honest, are defining how things are going to look in FY21 or in 2021. So in parallel, making sure that we have the technologies we need to support the return of our workforce to the office when the time is right for that. So I'm constantly scouring and looking out for technologies that really will help us get back to that when the time is right for it. And finally, it's this continued drive to innovate. Like I said, it's going to be a whole new world over the next couple of years. We're all going to be collectively building it. For us at the NBA, tech will be at the forefront, driving new ways in which fans are going to be consuming the game. And my team will be developing the components and the infrastructure that creates the stats, video, and other interactive experiences that delight our fans.
Congratulations to all you've done. You're a leading light for the rest of us. I want to thank Krishna from the NBA and Inderpal Bhandari from IBM. And congratulations again to Krishna and his team for bringing back basketball for fans and players all around the world. Next up, we've got an all-star panel from IBM, JD Power, Red Hat, and Sloan Kettering. We'll see you there. Thanks again. So without further ado, let's get started. Welcome to the panel, Bernardo.
Thanks, David. Thanks for the invite. I'm glad to be here. I've been for the last 3 years with JD Power. JD Power mainly because we do awards. You see those awards in TV, but we are fundamentally a data analytics and technology company. I joined 3 years ago. Initially, my title was Chief Digital Officer. Now the title is Chief Digital and Technology Officer. We're in the midst of a transformation to be a company that is data-driven, AI-driven, technology-driven. Reporting organizations, the technology reports to me, both the CTO and the CIO. Data science, the Chief Data Officer reports to me. Also our research team, which is pretty big in JD Power, we do a lot of that. And what we call the consumer division, which is all the websites that are customer facing.
Thanks, Bernardo. Great to see you again. We're going to move to Chris Wright. Chris, 15 years at Red Hat. He's currently Senior Vice President, Chief Technology Officer. You could tell us about your role at Red Hat and your goals and responsibilities for this year.
So thanks for having me. At Red Hat, broadly, we're focused on delivering software, starting with open source communities and delivering that as software products and software-based services to our customers in the context that we would call open hybrid cloud. So I'm responsible for the technology strategy associated with all of our software and software products. I like to make fun of myself and say I'm buzzword compliant because I spend a lot of time in the emerging trends, emerging technologies across the technology industry. I partner across the organization for things like internal IT, so our CIO is a peer, our Chief Digital Officer also a peer, and then we have shared responsibilities when it comes to defining not just data, but data strategy and some of the tools associated with how we manage data and do data analysis and machine learning. For us, everything starts in the open source communities and moves into the technology space and products that we deliver to our customers.
So Dr. Jensen last year became Chief Digital and Technology Officer at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. Dr. Jensen has published 4 books by Wiley, one of them on digital transformation, another on the hybrid cloud. He was formerly CTO at CVS Aetna. What's your role and responsibilities at Memorial Sloan Kettering?
The official title is Chief Digital and Technology Officer, which sort of tells you what reports up to me. That's everything in technology, so the CIO reports to me. I have the Chief Data Officer in my organization as well. I have the Chief Informatics Officer, which actually took on all the product management sitting in my organization. So similar to some of my colleagues, right, this is one of those roles where everything that's related to transformation, be that technology transformation, digital transformation, is part of my responsibility. What's interesting around the job is that it's very much a business-focused role. Look, we're a not-for-profit. There's still a business side to understanding what is the value we deliver into the ecosystem. And I spend more than half of my time on that part. Sometimes I classify myself as I'm the chief storyteller of the organization. Somebody has to tell the story that connects the vision and our entire purpose of existence with how do we do something about it in an increasingly hybrid environment where we have to both run what we have, innovate how we do the things we've done for 136 years, and hopefully by fusing physical and digital, deliver new value and new services to the people that need it.
Well, thank you so much, Klaus, for that important conversation. Thanks to all our guests, especially Krishna, Inderpal, Bernardo, Klaus, and Chris. It's great to see everybody in the chat. It's nice to see so much activity and so many people joining us today. We're going to take some time for a pulse poll. You should see a pop-up poll with just 3 questions in your window right now. I'll read the results live in a minute. And while you're taking the poll, just a reminder that we are taking your questions through chat, and we're going to get to them at the end of the program with all of our speakers. If we don't get to your questions today, we are going to get to all of them on and put the replies on the IBM blog, and we'll give you all a link to that. So while we're taking that live poll, the first few questions are coming in now. We're starting to see some results. First question, within your company, how close do the chief digital, chief data, and chief technology officers, or those acting in these roles, work together to drive enterprise-wide transformation? And the second question is, did COVID-19 accelerate your company's digital and technology strategy? And lastly, the third question, are you using a hybrid cloud environment? So while you're taking time to reply to the poll, just a reminder, oh, here are the results. Fantastic. Thank you all so much for replying. For the first question, how close do the CDOs and CTOs or people in those roles work? We had 40% say very close, 40% said somewhat close, so about 80% are either very or somewhat. And so that's pretty high. The second question, did COVID-19 accelerate your company's digital and technology strategy? And again, about 80% said either yes significantly or yes somewhat. Only about 20% said no. And then finally, question 3, are you using a hybrid cloud environment? And again, about 38%, about 40 and 70. So you got about 75% said yes, they are using a hybrid cloud environment. And about 13% said no, not at this time, but we are exploring. So pretty much majority, almost 90% said yes, or they are using or they will be. So fantastic. Those are the results of the poll. We appreciate you all participating. And again, stick around to the end. We're going to have some live Q&A with our speakers at the very end. And now back to the panel. Live, we'll start off with a question for Inderpal Bhandari, Global Chief Data Officer at IBM. Thanks, everybody. What are your roles and responsibilities at IBM?
Thanks, Dave. So I'm part of the transformation team. My responsibility is to make IBM itself into an AI enterprise. By that, I mean infuse AI into every one of our major business processes, and then use what we've done internally as a showcase for our clients and customers. And with our recent acquisition of Red Hat, this is all based on Linux. The processes that we are infusing AI into can be run in a hybrid multi-cloud environment. That's essentially what we're trying to do by leveraging the Red Hat acquisition. The way we're set up, the Chief Transformation Officer effectively is my boss, who is our Chief Financial Officer, as well as the Senior Vice President of Operations. And my peers are the Head of Operations and the CIO. This triumvirate is responsible for spearheading the transformation.
Inderpal, do you work with Chris over at Red Hat?
Chris and I have been collaborating with regard to our clients, where we are trying to describe to them what that new platform is and how, by making use of specific Red Hat components, such as OpenShift, you're able to effectively run consistently and appropriately any piece of code or access any piece of data, again, appropriately, across your entire hybrid environment. It doesn't matter whether it's on-prem, whether it's on your cloud, on somebody else's cloud, etc. So we've been collaborating closely with regard to that.
From your perspective, how's the relationship in delivering on enterprise strategy working with your C-suite peers at IBM?
Well, there's two ways to look at that. One is with IBM and one is still within Red Hat, because actually the way we're set up, Red Hat is a relatively independent entity serving a set of market needs that include building a broad ecosystem, which requires some neutrality. So we have to balance our relationships between our broad partner ecosystem, which in some contexts you could say includes IBM. We have a very tight working relationship with IBM for obvious reasons and some shared initiatives. When I work within the Red Hat world, the way we work is largely informed by our roots in open source community development. So it's a very collaborative environment, which means we're bringing ideas together from different, call it disciplines or different points of view. We actually have something that we call the open decision framework, which is a way that we take inputs from a broad set of constituents driving towards a specific outcome. And in that context, I think the notion of small iterative successes that Bernardo brought up, really critical and something that we've learned a lot from open source communities. It's how you evolve technology, and looking at things like technology partnerships with our data side of our house, which is really looking at things beyond just the technology, but also compliance, a set of regulatory concerns, access to data. How do we get clean data shared, normalized across a broad organization just within Red Hat? That looks like a very collaborative experience where we look at how can we agree on common tools and platforms. And then from a process point of view, I'm a technologist. I always begrudgingly admit that a transformation project is one part technology and a significant part people and process. So getting the right process in place for understanding how we identify data sources, how we normalize data, and how we give compliant access to data across the organization so we can be a data-driven organization and make decisions as an enterprise. Critical part of that discussion is the technology platform and the data team and the data analytics, data science teams. Our goal is to give our data science teams the technology tools they need to move as quickly as an enterprise developer moves in evolving an enterprise application. We think of it from a technology point of view. And then more broadly, when we're working with IBM, that is bringing together the broader portfolio that IBM has that's got all of the AI-infused technology that Inderpal was talking about, really looking at this from how can we bring the right tools to our customer base to enable the transformations that are going to be data-driven transformations where we're bringing data and applications closer together and bringing data and applications together in a way that's independent of where exactly they're deployed, where governance, data provenance, all of these things are critical questions that any C-suite officer needs to be able to answer. And that starts with a technology solution of understanding where data came from, providing the right rules and access, creating the right environments for data scientists to have quick access to experimentation and providing data insights.
Wondered if you wanted to jump in on the hybrid cloud.
The phrase hybrid cloud is, I think you can find as many executives as there are in a room, and you will have that many opinions as to what it really is and why you need to do it. Right? Everybody knows that we got to move to the cloud. It doesn't mean everybody necessarily agrees what it means to move to the cloud. I think it's the mindset. And part of the reason I wrote that book is like 50 pages long, so it's not 500. But I want to tell the story of how to think about the journey to hybrid cloud, which is the actual title of the book. I think it's about value. I think it's about freedom of choice. And in many ways, if you're in a transformation business, it's more important how you give your developers the right tools to go do what they need to do in a timely fashion than it is to look at a cloud strategy through the lens of I'm going to de-risk my infrastructure and IT ops team. So you have to go in eyes wide open. The book has some ideas as to how you might think about different types of values, and it even suggests different levels of sophistication from being able to put the pieces together all the way through what some people would call cloud native. But it really is a journey. I think you have to be clear on why you're doing it and figure out how it helps your business strategy and not just your technology strategy.
January 2020, Mike Tyson's famous quote was, everyone has a plan until you get punched in the face.
Yeah.
COVID hit us hard. Has COVID changed your strategy and tactics at MSKCC? And if so, what's your top priority now?
I'd say it accelerated the strategy. The reason that Memorial Sloan Kettering exists is to lead in the prevention, detection, treatment, and cure of cancer. It's really that simple. Right? We've been doing that for 136 years. It's just that what it means to lead in the prevention, detection, treatment, and cure of cancer continues to change. And every decade, the embodiment of that mission is different. And it changed again overnight as a pandemic that we haven't seen since the early 1900s hit us. Overnight, we had to send thousands of people to work from home. That included some of the people that normally would engage with patients. We had to figure out what to do with patients that were infected with the virus. We didn't quite know what it means to have a cancer patient that has a virus in their body at the same time as we would normally discharge them and send them home. Nobody did. Because we don't think we still don't understand how it works. So we had a dual challenge. We had literally weeks to figure it out. Everybody talked about the fact that you got to figure out what to do with the patients in the facility. But the more insidious question is, can you actually send them home? So we had to figure out how to monitor patients in their homes real time, how to stay in touch with them, how to shift around our integrated care model so it felt like they were still being taken care of. We had to send 6,000 people to a work from home model when we were pretty much shutting down everything in the city, and to make that work. And many of them are still sitting in a work from home setting. That was baptism by fire in some ways. I'd been there at that point in time, 3 months. What it also did was it demonstrated the brittleness of how we normally think about healthcare. Because we think about healthcare through the lens of everybody has their own specialized role. That all broke down when we were in the middle of a pandemic. And the normal flows of information, data, people, referrals, screenings, and patients didn't work the way that it used to. And people started making different choices in terms of what they were and were not willing to. And it wasn't just that the elective procedures were postponed. You can actually debate whether cancer is ever elective. I don't think it is. But some of the stuff we do was classified as elective. More interestingly, it changed habits. And we saw a shift in what people want to do, how they expect to engage with us, and where they want to go. We also saw accelerated slippage of the boundaries between the traditional providers. So my strategy was, we need to take care of the needs of the whole human. My strategy is, we need to take care of the needs of the whole human. I thought I had 5 to 7 years to do it, and now I have 1 to 2.
It's probably a great question for everyone, that Mike Tyson question. Has JD Power's plans changed since January?
So obviously we closed our offices for the last 5 months. We've been lucky that most of our people are engineers, data scientists, designers, product managers, etc. So we've been working from home very effectively. All engineers are used to do that. It was a little bit of a learning lesson for many people, but now we work pretty effectively. So we're in the lucky side that we didn't have to be together or physically in the office for like doctors or nurses, etc. Obviously, in general, it took a little bit of adaptation, but all good.
Chris, same question. Has COVID changed your strategy and tactics at Red Hat?
As Bernardo said, the obvious piece is we focus a lot on our employee safety. So send everybody home. Being in a technology space that's been as smooth a transition as could be, we already had a very large, what we call remote worker population at Red Hat. And the engineering environment is collaborative with open source communities. So we already work remote from peers and communities. But that isn't to say that it hasn't been challenging and stressful, because you take somebody who's maybe even used to working at home, but not working at home with a partner and a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old screaming for attention. And it's a very different environment. So we've had to adjust in terms of just thinking about the human in the people that you're working with and recognizing that everybody is under a level of stress. At a corporate level, our strategy hasn't changed at all. We have seen a very consistent response from our customer base in that accelerated transformation mindset associated with COVID. When I think of a hybrid cloud, it's really focused on 2 key attributes: operational efficiency, developer velocity. Looking at how you can improve operational efficiency for the industries that are hit heavily with a negative financial impact from the COVID crisis, looking a lot at their operational costs and where they can build efficiency. And that's about standardization and building common platforms. And then there's another portion of our customer base that is really under undue stress for scale and response, whether it's in the medical industry, healthcare industry, or logistics and supply chain, where we're all ordering things and having them delivered to our homes. So it's part of our customer base is looking at how quickly can we make changes, and the cloud and the technologies associated with that are helpful on both ends of those spectrums, which means that we've seen a lot of acceleration. One sort of interesting surprise, I guess, is some of those really forward-looking movements to a public cloud have leaders looking at the cost and the value that they have sitting in a data center. And is there an opportunity to extend the life cycle of an existing data center, squeeze more out of it right now, which in that kind of hybrid world, it just highlights that it's never as simple as everything is in one place. We've also been looking a lot at edge as an emerging space, and some of the aspirations of edge, where you think about augmented reality and virtual reality, felt a little science fiction-y. Today, when we spend all of our time on video conferences trying to reconnect as humans, augmented reality doesn't sound like such a stretch anymore. You get more like an intrinsic understanding of the value there. Remote medicine, as an example of an edge use case that's we always knew was important, but suddenly it became imperative. So a lot of interesting shifts that I think are accelerating a focus on digital transformation.
Sure is, Chris. What is the top priority now for IBM?
I echo some of the comments that have already been made. We do see that clients and customers are accelerating their digital transformation efforts, which effectively means that we have to accelerate our efforts in being able to serve those clients. Things have accelerated, there's no question about that. I think the other point I'd like to add on, a lot more focus in terms of leadership style on the people aspect of things, mainly because you're all working remotely. We didn't really skip a beat in terms of taking over 300,000 employees to a remote work from home setup. That actually went very well. For a global company with that many people across the globe, it was very smooth. The people aspect, that's been suffering. And then the civil unrest kind of drove that home, but then that's something that I think is here to stay. I spend a lot more time talking to people in my organization, one-on-one, at all levels, which is something that has changed from the past. It just wasn't as intense as it is now. I think the other point I'll piggyback on is from the standpoint of hybrid cloud. If you are really a multinational global company, it's almost going to be an imperative that you have to develop a proficiency in hybrid cloud. And it's not so much even a matter of standardizing to different environments. Of course, you've got to standardize across different environments, but you also have to, in some cases, run differently, but appropriately in different environments, because the regulations, say, around privacy are different for different countries, for different states, etc. But you want to be able to administer all that in a way that's consistent. So I think in a nutshell, as this hybrid cloud, hybrid multi-cloud, open, as Chris put it, approach takes off, you will see those kinds of advances in the software foundation that will enable people to do all that kind of stuff.
Bernardo, what advice would you give other organizations looking to optimize the relationships between digital data and technology?
I think the foundational part is what, for example, Chris talked about, the need to have well set up structures for data ingestion, processing, normalization, a very scalable data governance. Also, Chris has written a book about digital transformation, which lays out many of the things I believe that we have talked about the last 10 years. And I think that we understand what needs to get done in that enabling capability. It's hard work, but I think it is a matter of, if we choose the right people, we will get there. We will build this foundational capabilities right. In my mind, the next step is value delivery. Specifically in AI and machine learning, we are accustomed as product people, for example, as building solutions. And if you look back the last 10 years, we became very good at building solutions, whether they are enterprise product designers, product managers, et cetera, to take technologists, to take UX research, to take design and put it together and build great user experiences to solve a problem. But we as an industry don't know how to use intelligence to solve problems yet at a scalable way. If you talk to data scientists, they build a model that produces a forecast or an optimization model. But how do we take that intelligence and use it to solve a problem that is significant for our customer, for our client? And I think bridging that gap is important for us to start imagining what is possible. Because when you approach a problem in the industry, like we have huge problems that we're trying to affront in JD Power, for example, the auto industry. They have about $350 billion in COGS just in Detroit. Dealers have about $250 billion of inventory. And to sell a car, it takes 70 days in the average last year. This year is longer because of COVID. 70 days is the average it takes to sell a home in the US. It's the same time that it takes to sell a car on a dealer lot. So that's the problem statement. So how do you use your data sets, all the infrastructure that we talked about, all the technologies to actually solve that problem? And to solve that problem, you have to get embedded into the workflow of very large organizations when decisions, micro decisions are made. So the gap between solving that problem and what is possible with intelligence is a gap that we are learning as an industry to solve. Because we don't know yet, the product people, it's hard to understand. The business people have a hard time understanding what is possible with intelligence, with artificial intelligence. So as we bridge that gap, I think that will be critical for us to come together to understand that.
Bernardo, the chief data officer role reports up to you, is that right?
Correct, yeah.
We got a pretty big community here. I think you're looking for a new chief data officer at JD Power?
Yeah, correct. Yeah, we're looking for a new chief data officer, and we're looking for good ML people as well.
Maybe somebody from our community can help fill that role. Same question over to Dr. Jensen. What advice would you give other organizations looking to optimize the relationship across the C-suite, digital data tech?
I have the data team in my organization, but regardless, whether it's inside or outside your own organization, and I think you have to be honest, transparent, and very in transformation ahead of you. When I just landed at Memorial Sloan Kettering, the first thing that I told my team on the very first town hall is, I can't tell you what the destination looks like, because this is a journey and there isn't a finite destination. The journey never ends. So I can't do that. I can ask you for one thing, and that's to jump into the breach with me and be willing to do battle. It's all about taking on that role as chief storyteller. If you want to drive change, you have to tell the story about why that's important. You have to find a way of turning vision into action. That happens to be our slogan. As a leader, as a senior executive, you have to tell the story of what that looks like. And you have to find some catchphrases that resonate with the larger organization. There's two of mine that I'm going to offer up as things you might want to think about. The one is fewer, bigger things. There's so much stuff that's hitting us from all over. Certainly the COVID-19 pandemic made that worse. And I'm not saying you don't have to continue to do all the little things and keep the lights on and make small improvement, but you have to focus on few bigger things when it comes to actually driving meaningful change. The other one is doing more with more. That's not what you're supposed to say. You're supposed to say doing more with less. I think that's wrong. Because living in an era, if you put together data and digital and technology, and different ways of doing business and cloud and APIs and digital transformation, all these other things, there are so many more things we can do because we've got more tools in our toolbox. So I'd rather think in terms of doing more with more than doing more with less.
Chris, over to you. What advice would you give other organizations looking to optimize these relationships between digital data and tech?
A couple of things. One, data is pervasive. And so ensuring that we have consistent access to data is a critical part of turning data into value and insights for the business. I look at that, partially it's compliance, partially it's awareness, and there's a tools and platform question around how do we share data. The other piece is we have to recognize that technology is moving very rapidly in this space, especially when you think of data and machine learning. The state of the art is advancing daily. So when we look at the digital transformation, the real broad business impacts that we're going to use technology and data to drive, I think we need to set up an environment that allows for experimentation and having access to tools that are up to date and access to data, which means the way I think of it is cloud created access to self-service for application developers so they didn't have to ask permission to do things. We need to give that same permissionless creativity canvas to data scientists to help think creatively about how we do major transformation efforts at the business level, because at the end, we're trying to drive business change. And so I think it's bringing the different teams together, creating common platforms, recognizing that tools are changing rapidly, creating enough infrastructure to share data in a responsible way so that we can give broader access to data, letting our creative minds take over, because that's really something that we bring. Let the machines create some of the insights, but it's the creativity process of thinking differently about how we might solve the problem that's really going to create real value. And the way we think about it at Red Hat is that openness, that collaboration, that transparency. Our catchphrase is open unlocks the world's potential. So creating that context is what unlocks that potential.
What advice would you give other organizations looking to optimize the relationship across digital data and tech?
I would say, you've got to keep your eye on the transformation. I mean, that is the eventual outcome. That's really what you're striving for. And so if you use that as the goal, the objective that ties everybody together, then it doesn't matter as much exactly how that pie is sliced if everybody has their eye on that same prize. Take our example where we're set up so that the CIO, the head of operations, and myself are peers. And, we pretty much work things out because our boss is, in effect, the chief transformation officer for IBM, and he's setting the direction. And so we've got to all play ball. If you have a clear-cut mission like that and a clear-cut organizational setup, then that helps, that facilitates, that enables, and so forth. I think the other thing I would say is I would go back to our cognitive enterprise blueprint that you're very familiar with. This is my own belief here that I think there are four aspects that you need to bring together to drive change and transformation. One is data, one is technology, and then there's the business process, because you've got to change those to affect the impact. But finally, perhaps even most important, the culture and organizational aspects of what you need to do. So if you bring those four things together and they are able to move in lock sync as opposed to one getting too far ahead of the other, you're going to have a successful transformation.
Thank you so much to our speakers, Krishna, Inderpal, Bernardo, Klaus, and Chris. And we're going to open it up now as we're bringing them in for live Q&A. We appreciate all the questions in the chat. Wow, it's great to see Ian Wright from the UK and Lisa Schneider, the CDO, Merriam-Webster, and Amit from Tel Aviv, Matt from IBC. We had Julia Bardmesser coming back again, her third one in a row. And thanks to Helen Crooks, CDO, for joining us. Also want to thank you all for participating in the chat and asking questions, especially Abhay and Stephen and Tim Goddard, David Dunn. Really appreciate all that. So we've got all our speakers back, and we're going to open it up to that live Q&A. Question one comes for Krishna. And just as a recap, we do have already established the NBA being at the forefront of the intersection of technology and data, leveraging structured and unstructured data for teams, coaches, fans, and players. And as mentioned, Inderpal and IBM back in the 90s pioneered this game-changing data tech for the NBA. It was the first franchise really to deploy this for all NBA coaches. And the NBA is still at the forefront of using data tech for all levels of play. For example, wearables, performance metrics, data collection, safety, and social distancing. So I guess the first question from chat is for you, Krishna. How is the NBA using data tech across all levels to enable and support teams, coaches, players, and fans, and the overall basketball sports ecosystem?
Great. Thank you, David, for that question. Firstly, and thanks for having me. So the first thing I'll say is that there's a general trend to use data to explain things better. At the end of the day, that's, I think, one of the objectives, right? Whether it's about yourself, your employees, or your customers. Sports, and certainly basketball, is no exception and is no different. So we have seen this democratization of data as an opportunity to explain the game better. For the casual fan, for the super fan, for coaches and teams, and perhaps even for using data to enhance and augment our broadcast and live stream feeds. So our stats platform, nba.com/stats, was born because we had a lot of data and we wanted to use technology to deliver it to our fans in a way that we thought we would like to do. So when we built this platform, the data was distilled into tangible, bite-sized nuggets that didn't require complex mathematical operations to understand. It has an intuitive interface. Fans have unprecedented access to historical data. We have about 4.7 quadrillion, 1,000 trillion combinations of stats on the site. And once we put that out there, we realized we wanted to enhance it further. So we were the first league to quantify and analyze every movement of live game action throughout the entire season. So we deployed player tracking cameras. So it's about 10 or 12 high definition cameras situated in the rafters of every arena. And then we have computer vision software that processes the videos and extracts like raw player movement tracking data sets about 25 times a second. And the system then uses AI and ML to transform the raw data into basketball plays. So essentially what we have done is we've taken input from coaches and basketball experts, and a machine has been taught the game of basketball. And the process currently takes a few minutes. Our ultimate objective is to actually improve the latency on that so that in real time we could be provided augmented reality feeds, like graphic overlays on broadcast feeds. And now everybody can play with that data. So originally we put that out there to help the fans, but we found that coaches and players and teams have found this to be a valuable team, and because it's given them access to groundbreaking stats like stuff like defensive impact or passing and shooting or rebounding percentages. And then we also found that we were able to get even more complex stats. It's actually the newly minted what I call hustle stats. stuff like deflections or loose ball recoveries or charges or contested shots, right? These were previously intangible stats that now give coaches, their fans a better understanding of the real value of a player. So these are, and then of course, these are more game centric. We also make product decisions like most other companies make around data. In closing, I'll just say that the superpower, in my view, that data gives us is the ability to leverage it to create derivative products that cater to micro segments of our audience.
But that's fantastic, Krishna. I'll bet you any rotisserie basketball folks would love to get their hands on those kinds of stats, right? There's so many data geeks out there and sports geeks. So go ahead, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, I just said, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's, there is a thin line between data geeks and sports fans. And, I think that's what we're trying to do in terms of leveraging data to put that stuff out there.
Very exciting stuff. Great conversation. Thank you so much. And next one for Bernardo. Bernardo, you had mentioned the massive opportunity, but also the challenges of infusing AI into every workflow to improve business decision-making. I wonder if you could recap the benefits, so the challenges JD Power and others try to infuse AI into workflows.
Sure, absolutely. So let's take an example of one of the important things that we're trying to work with the OEMs, with the car manufacturers to solve. When they have to make a decision, any OEM have to make a decision on what cars to build and where to send those cars in the US. So if I own a particular model, for example, Toyota Corolla, correct? How many of them do I need to build? And then also what configuration, what colors, what size of the wheels, what, et cetera, correct? But what entertainment system and so on. That decision is made all the time because they need to figure out what to build, what the output should be of the plant, and where those cars should be able to go to match customer expectations the best possible. And again, this is a $1.5 trillion industry, so the numbers are huge. So we have a lot of information about the market, correct? How cars are moving in the dealers, prices paid, configuration that are attractive in certain markets, and so on. So we have machine learning models that predict for a specific region, what is the right car to be sent to that region. Now, the issue is that in order to make the decision at the OEM that is made all the time, they need to take into account things like what is the manufacturing plant set up to do right now, correct? What is the line set up to do? And what does it cost to change that production line? What parts do I have in inventory? And for example, what are the margins that each option that I put in the car has? So it's a very complex decision, and it's made every single day. And it's made in a single day by a person and a set of people that work on a specific workflow using different systems. So the challenge for us is how do we take our insights and provide that insight into a system that has some other constraints that can be leveraged by an application that helps somebody do a decision and make their job. We like a lot the concept of jobs to be done. So think really hard about what is the job that somebody's trying to make, and then help that person make that job a reality. In some of the cases where you apply machine learning, you can step back and build a model and be very agnostic on how that model is going to be used. In the cases that we're trying to solve around applying incentives in the car industry or what cars to build, et cetera, we have to understand the role of machine learning in that environment, in that ecosystem. Because if we ignore the ecosystem, then our application, our insights will not be useful, will not be applied. So we have to work with understanding our data sets, the insights that we can build, the constraints on the client, and also the applications that are used in order to drive those decisions. And all those things need to come together. That is the only way that you can solve it. So it's not an easy path forward. It requires a lot of integration of clients, third parties, and us. But it's the only way we can make in these huge companies enough change in the day-to-day to drive transformation. And I think that the upside is huge, correct? We just calculated, we did some work with BCG, just in terms of reducing complexity in the way we build cars. The upside for the Detroit 3 could be $3.5 billion in savings, correct? But it only happens if you can go to that level of resolution in terms of building systems where insights can drive the right decisions.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for unpacking that, because I know a lot of our audience going through the same things, and it is just a massive opportunity. So I also want to thank our next guest, Klaus, especially Krishna with the season just reopening, the NBA season, and Klaus, over at Memorial Sloan Kettering doing God's work and helping people with cancer, but also in the face of COVID, how busy you all are. And so our next question is for Klaus. We had a lot of questions for attendees regarding the rapid adoption of edge technologies in healthcare. Things like remote diagnostics, telemedicine, augmented reality, virtual reality, et cetera, due to the pandemic. Can you provide some insight into the kinds of innovations Sloan Kettering is exploring or that you've adopted rapidly due to the pandemic?
It's an interesting question. And in some ways, we can ask ourselves, what is the edge? Because edge computing used to be something where we're thinking about, okay, it's somewhere not in our data centers. It's somewhere else. When you're in healthcare, the edge is your life. In some ways, I could argue that, especially as we move to more of a hybrid care model, right, and we're starting to blend, talk a little bit about it, digital and physical means. The edge is life in all its glory, the good moments, the bad moments, right? Every single touch point you have. And how do you deploy solutions and technology that actually meaningfully can help you at the edge when the edge is your life? Part of what we've found is that it's not about data or technology. It's not about science or people. It's really about how we meaningfully can shape an experience. So I'll go back to the good old design thinking and thinking about the experience. What is the meaningful experience we could give anyone that is either afraid of cancer or has some kind of treatment need, whatever it might be? It's a disease that is permeating every dimension of your life. I think the answer to what is the edge is something that is all-encompassing enough to cover all those aspects of your life. That's not the traditional answer to what can you do at the edge, but I think if you're a comprehensive cancer center, it's a meaningful one.
Thanks, Klaus. And these are life and death decisions at your institution. We're just grateful that these big decisions are in the hands of someone like you who's got all of your experience. And I want to move to Chris Wright. Chris, you made some great points today about the hybrid cloud, and you talked about Red Hat's mission around driving operational efficiency and developer velocity, and how the imperative of moving to the hybrid cloud is even more important right now in light of COVID and the challenging financial environment we're all operating in. For all of the chief data and chief technology officers out there and joining us today, what advice would you have on how to accelerate from a technology perspective?
Well, thanks for having me on this panel. And I have to say, first of all, I'm a technologist, and I mentioned this earlier, but I think it's important to think about accelerating less the technology story and more the business story. So we think in terms of flexibility, choice, having capabilities within your business to choose how and where you deploy applications and how you bring data to those applications. And I think that's the underlying platform discussion. If you look at how a hyperscaler scales, it's through consistency and standardization of building blocks. So creating that consistency and standard building block is a key part of creating scale. That's the operational side. And that enables choice for developers because you have a common platform to onboard and target. The sort of danger of getting overly obsessed with technology and not thinking about the business challenges, you may miss the opportunity of what are the first iterative steps you need to take to move towards a business changing outcome. And that might not be the technology itself. That may be the process involved with bringing data to data scientists and enabling, say, for example, rapid experimentation. So that notion of how do we get a better model, it's not just more data, it's not just smarter data scientists, it's also rapid experimentation. And so that, I think, is a process question as much as anything else. And so it's not just technology acceleration, it's really looking at how do you partner with the business to include technology into the conversation, but think about the process, the people, and the business outcomes.
Thank you, Chris. And that echoes Interpol's remarks about his 4 dimensions around successful digital transformation. Can't forget that business process piece of all this. So we will move to Interpol next to sort of round out and close out the session. You made reference in your remarks to how important it is for data and technology leaders to work together to drive transformation. And looking ahead to our next month's session, in September, we're going to have a session on data privacy and security. One question we received from an attendee asks, how have you been able to reconcile trying not to negatively impact revenue growth or transformation activities with the need to respond to what might be characterized as a rapidly evolving data privacy regulatory environment that's going to require implementing new data classification, data handling, and security practices?
So digital transformation, obviously, that is the objective. But if you break it down to the next level, it's about growth. So when people talk about new products, et cetera, that's all around growth, right? So the digital transformation has to enable you to do that, accelerating velocity. Chris mentioned all that stuff. And then there is also the operational efficiency. So that's the bottom line piece in terms of doing things faster, more accurately, et cetera. But then the third dimension of the transformation is risk, addressing risk, reducing risk, all that stuff. So those 3 have to go together. And I think the privacy, that whole landscape, that's moving rapidly. It's evolving rapidly. It's moving towards a direction of, I would say, sovereignty is kind of at the end of it's the end of the rainbow, right? I mean, that's where people are trying to get to. That it's my data, leave it alone, or do only what you want to do with it. That's the kind of the information age equation here. So people have to transform to that end in terms of addressing risk. And so, for instance, and that goes to even to a values question, right? I mean, what are your values for the information age? And I would say one of the key values from an IBM standpoint, which evolved into the information age, and it's something that we're very visible with now, is, hey, we believe your data is your data. Not only that, any insights from your data is yours. And then that informs everything else we do, including the architectures we build, including the products we build, the solutions we build. So I think that's one aspect of it. So if you envision your transformation as addressing risk as a key component of what you need to do, if you also have values that inform you, so that inform your development efforts and your product solutioning efforts, in keeping with what's happening with the information age. And then I think one of the other key values and principles that, and Chris alluded to this, it has to do with choice, where you want to give people the choice, the flexibility. So you are standardizing, but at the same time, you're enabling choice. And which is kind of the essence of, Klaus made that point of the hybrid cloud setup. And so you've got to march in sync, to attain all those things. And that's how you keep it balanced. Now, I know we've got a whole new, summit event that's going to be dedicated to this, and rightfully so, because I think it is important to address. I mean, most people, usually when I get that question about how do you balance out revenue growth, it's more with governance. It's interesting that this one came with, privacy. And I think what I would say is for privacy, because it's evolving, you pretty much have to make that part of your transformational objective, that whatever you build is going to address that. The only time you get into trouble with that is if your business model itself relies on other people's data and you're not really in a position to say that, hey, this belongs to you, but because your whole business model is like that. And then I think it gets much trickier.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for tying in Klaus's comment too about the hybrid cloud. I think he mentioned it's about, one, value, and number 2, freedom of choice. But hey, we ran a little bit late today, but it's expected when you get 5 C-level people at important organizations on a call. So I want to thank again our guest speakers for joining us today. But most of all, I want to thank all of you for hanging in there with us and for joining and participating, and for the incredible work that you're doing, especially under these extremely challenging and unprecedented circumstances. We hope to see you all again next time. The IBM CDO Summit Series continues in September. As Interpol said, we have a session on privacy and governance on September 16th. And then the following month, on October 14th, we're going to dig deeper into the hybrid cloud and the benefits of the hybrid cloud as we explore hybrid multi-cloud use cases at scale. So to find out more or to register, head over to cdoclub.com. Meantime, please stay safe and healthy, and we'll see you all in September. And now for closing comments, I'm delighted to reintroduce Caitlin Halferty, Director of AI Accelerator and Client Success at IBM. Caitlin.
Thank you, Dave. And I know we are over time, so I'll keep my remarks short. Thank you again for joining us today. Fantastic session. We didn't get a chance to address your questions. We'll make sure we capture them and get those posts on the blog, as Dave said. And please do join us in September. So thank you for holding on. Really appreciate it. Send any feedback to us as we prepare for our September session. Thank you to our fantastic panelists and all of our attendees. See you in September. Thank you.